The acceptance letter was still warm in Maya Rodriguez's hand when her father told her college would ruin her life. Not might, not could, would. And in that moment, sitting at the scratched wooden table where they'd shared 1,000 meals, 18-year-old Maya had to choose between the man who raised her and the future she'd been dreaming about since she was old enough to read. Some people say blood is thicker than water. But what happens when your own blood becomes the wall standing between you and everything you've ever wanted? It was a Tuesday evening in late March when Maya's world split in two. The kitchen smelled like her father's famous carnitas, the ones he only made for special occasions. And she'd thought foolishly, hopefully, that this would be a celebration. 4 acceptance letters fanned across the table like a winning hand of cards. State University, community college with honors, 2 private institutions offering partial scholarships. Each envelope represented a different path, a different version of who Maya could become. Her hands trembled as she pushed them toward Robert Rodriguez. Her father, the man who'd worked construction for 23 years to keep a roof over their heads after her mother died. She waited for his smile, for his pride, for the hug that would tell her she'd done something right. Instead, she got silence. The kind of silence that feels like falling. Robert picked up the letters one by one, his calloused fingers leaving slight smudges on the pristine paper. He read them slowly, methodically, the way he read blueprints on job sites. Maya watched his jaw tighten, watched the muscle in his cheek pulse the way it always did when he was angry, and she felt her stomach drop before he even spoke. When he finally looked up, his dark eyes weren't filled with pride. They were filled with something that looked dangerously close to betrayal. "No," he said. Just that. One word that carried the weight of 1,000 arguments they'd never had but were about to have. Maya's mouth went dry. She'd prepared for questions, for concerns about money, for the practical conversation about loans and budgets. She hadn't prepared for refusal. "Dad, these are good schools. This one offered me." But Robert was already standing, pushing back from the table with enough force to make the legs scrape against the linoleum floor. "I said no, Maya. College is a scam. A pretty, expensive scam that'll leave you drowning in debt for a piece of paper that means nothing in the real world." His voice was rising now, taking on that edge that meant the discussion was over before it began. "You want to learn something useful? I'll teach you. The business is doing well. You could manage the books, handle contracts, maybe even run crews in a few years. Real skills, real money. Not some fantasy about sitting in classrooms while the world passes you by." Maya felt something crack inside her chest. Not break, not yet, but definitely crack. "Mom wanted me to go to college," she said quietly, and immediately wished she could take it back. Her father's face changed, hardened. "Your mother's not here," he said, and the words hung in the air between them like smoke. "I am. And I'm telling you this is a mistake. I've seen smart kids like you go off to university, come back 4 years later with fancy degrees and no jobs, working at coffee shops for minimum wage while trying to pay off loans that'll follow them to the grave. I won't watch that happen to you. I won't pay for it to happen to you." He crossed his arms, and Maya recognized the stance. It was the same one he used when arguing with contractors, with suppliers, with anyone who tried to tell Robert Rodriguez he was wrong about something. "You want to waste your life chasing some dream. You do it on your own dime. I'm not contributing a single dollar to this. Not $1. The dinner grew cold on the table. The carnitas congealed. Maya sat there, staring at those acceptance letters, and felt the future she'd been building in her mind collapse like a house of cards. She'd won awards, maintained a 4.0 GPA while working weekends at the local hardware store, volunteered, led clubs, done everything the guidance counselors said would make her a strong candidate. And she was. The letters proved it. But none of that mattered if the one person who was supposed to support her refused to even consider it. She thought about her best friend Jordan, whose parents had already planned a whole celebration weekend for his acceptance. She thought about the kids at school whose biggest college concern was choosing between universities that all wanted them. She thought about her mother, who used to read to her every night, who always said education was the key to doors Maya couldn't even imagine yet. And then she thought about something else, something harder. The look on her father's face wasn't just anger. It was fear. Raw, undisguised fear. But fear of what? That she'd fail? Or that she'd succeed and leave him behind? That night, Maya lay in her childhood bedroom, staring at the glow in the dark stars she'd stuck to the ceiling when she was 9. Her phone buzzed. Jordan. Dude. Did you tell your dad yet? My parents want to take us both out to celebrate. She didn't respond. Instead, she opened her laptop and started researching something she'd never thought she'd have to research: how to pay for college completely on your own. Student loans. Work-study programs. Scholarships her schools hadn't mentioned. Part-time jobs that worked with class schedules. The numbers were staggering. Even with the partial scholarships, she'd need roughly $30,000 a year. That meant loans. Serious loans. The kind that would follow her for decades. Just like her father said. She ran the calculations 4 times, hoping the math would somehow change. It didn't. Going to college without her father's support meant graduating with over $100,000 in debt. Her father's voice echoed in her head, drowning in debt for a piece of paper. But then another voice answered, one that sounded suspiciously like her own. Or drowning in regret for the life you never tried to live. The next 3 weeks were a special kind of hell. Maya and her father existed in the same house like ghosts, haunting different rooms. He left for work before she woke up. She stayed at the library until after he went to bed. When they did cross paths, conversations were functional and cold. Dinner's in the fridge. I'll be late tomorrow. Did you pay the electric bill? The warmth that had defined their relationship. The easy banter. The inside jokes, all of it evaporated like water on hot pavement. Maya's guidance counselor, Mrs. Chen, called her into the office twice. Have you made a decision about which school? She asked gently, her kind eyes seeing more than Maya wanted to reveal. Your dad came around? Maya's throat tightened. Still working on it. She lied, and Mrs. Chen nodded slowly, but her expression said she knew the truth. It was Robert's brother, Uncle Marcus, who finally broke through the silence. He showed up on a Saturday morning with coffee and pan dulce from the Mexican bakery Maya's mother used to love. He found Maya on the porch, drowning in financial aid forms. Your dad told me, Marcus said, settling into the chair beside her. Not asked. Told. Maya didn't look up. Then you know he thinks I'm making a huge mistake. Marcus was quiet for a moment, sipping his coffee. I know he's scared, he finally said. Scared of what? That I'll be successful. The bitterness in her voice surprised even her. Marcus chuckled. But there was no humor in it. Scared that you'll prove he was wrong about everything he built his life believing. Scared that you'll become someone he can't understand. Scared that education will take you so far away he'll lose you completely. The way he lost your mom. Maya felt tears prick her eyes. That's not fair, she whispered. No. Marcus agreed. It's not. But fear rarely is. That conversation planted something in Maya. Not quite courage that would come later, but something close to it. Clarity. Maybe. Or determination. She spent the next week making calls, filling out forms, having uncomfortable conversations with financial aid officers about her situation. And then, on a Thursday afternoon, she walked into the kitchen where her father was reviewing invoices and said 5 words that would change everything. I'm going to college, Dad. Robert looked up slowly, his reading glasses perched on his nose, and Maya saw the exact moment he understood she wasn't asking for permission. She was informing him. Without my help? His voice was flat. Without your help. You'll regret it. Maybe, Maya said, and her voice only shook a little. But it'll be my regret. My choice. My life. She placed the acceptance letter on the table. She'd chosen the state university with the best financial aid package along with her signed loan documents. I leave in August. I'd love for you to support this decision, but I understand if you can't. Either way, I'm going. Robert stared at those papers for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough, like gravel. Then I guess there's nothing more to say. He stood, walked past her, and the sound of his truck starting in the driveway felt like a door slamming shut. Maya stood alone in the kitchen, her hands shaking, her heart racing, wondering if she'd just made the bravest decision of her life, or the biggest mistake. The acceptance letter lay on the table, and for just a second, she wanted to tear it up, to run after him, to take it all back. But she didn't. Instead, she picked up her phone and texted Mrs. Chen. I'm accepting the offer. I'll make it work. The response came back immediately. I never doubted you would. And just like that, Maya Rodriguez stepped onto a path that would lead her through hell and back, that would test every ounce of strength she had, that would force her to choose between proving her father wrong and proving herself right. She didn't know it yet, but that graduation day, 4 years in the future, would bring her face to face with a question she couldn't yet answer. So here's what I want you to consider. If the person who gave you everything suddenly stood between you and your dreams, could you choose yourself over them? And if you did, if you walked away and succeeded beyond every expectation, would victory taste sweet or bitter? Would proving them wrong be enough? Or would you spend the rest of your life wishing they'd been there to see you prove yourself right? Maya's first night in the dorm room, she didn't sleep. She counted ceiling tiles instead. 48 of them. She counted them 7 times while her roommate snored peacefully in the bed across from her, while sounds of music and laughter filtered through the walls from students celebrating their newfound freedom, while her phone sat silent on the nightstand. No goodnight text from her father for the first time in 18 years. That silence was louder than any alarm clock. And somewhere in that darkness, between ceiling tile number 48 and the first hint of dawn bleeding through the curtains, Maya made herself a promise. She wouldn't just survive college, she would dominate it. Because proving her father wrong wasn't enough anymore. She needed to prove to herself that the cost of this choice, the brutal price of walking away from the only family she had left, was worth paying. The thing about determination is that it looks beautiful in movies. In real life, it looks like Maya shuffling into her 8 a.m. calculus class on 3 hours of sleep because she'd worked the closing shift at the campus library until 1 in the morning. It looks like her stomach growling through lectures because she'd skipped lunch to save $7.15. It looks like worn shoes and secondhand textbooks and studying in the bathroom during her break at the campus coffee shop, where she worked weekends because the dorm was too loud and the library closed at midnight. Determination isn't pretty. It's exhausted. But Maya wore her exhaustion like armor, and when other freshmen complained about difficult professors or boring assignments, she kept her mouth shut and worked harder. Because they had safety nets. She had debt growing by the day, and gravity waiting to pull her down the second she faltered. By the end of first semester, Maya had made exactly 3 friends, worked 4 part-time jobs, and stopped counting how many times she'd eaten ramen for dinner. Her GPA was 3.9, not perfect but close. Close enough that when the dean's list was posted outside the registrar's office, her name was there, printed in bold letters that felt like a small victory in a war she was losing. She took a photo of it, almost sent it to her father. Her thumb hovered over his contact name for a full minute before she deleted the message unsent. What was the point? He'd made his position clear. She was on her own. But here's the thing about being on your own. It makes you notice things. Like how Jordan's parents sent care packages every other week. Like how her roommate complained about her mom calling too much. Like how the girl in her economics class casually mentioned her dad was paying for a summer trip to Europe as a reward for good grades. Maya noticed all of it. And each observation was a small cut that bled resentment she couldn't quite stanch. The phone call came in February of her freshman year. 2 a.m. on a Thursday. Maya's heart nearly stopped when she saw her father's name on the screen because 2 a.m. calls only mean bad news. She answered on the second ring, her voice rough with panic. "Dad? What's wrong? Are you okay?" There was breathing on the other end. Heavy. Unsteady. Then, I saw the article. Maya's mind raced. What article? The campus newspaper. Robert continued. His words slightly slurred. And Maya realized with a shock that he might be drunk. Her father never drank. Someone sent it to me. You won some award. The article. Right. The first-year achievement scholarship with the cash prize. The newspaper had interviewed her, and she'd been honest about her situation, about paying her own way, about working multiple jobs. She'd never mentioned her father by name, but anyone who knew her would know. "Yeah," she said carefully. "I did." Silence stretched between them like a tightrope. Then, "Must be nice, getting recognized for going into debt." The words were meant to hurt, and they did, but underneath the cruelty Maya heard something else. Something that sounded like pain. Dad. But he'd already hung up. That conversation should have broken her. Instead, it crystallized something. Her father reaching out, even drunk, even angry, even just to lash out, meant he was still paying attention, which meant part of him still cared. Which meant, in some twisted way, she was still fighting for his approval even though she'd sworn she wasn't. And that realization was more terrifying than any amount of debt because it meant she couldn't win. If she failed, he'd been right. If she succeeded, she'd only proven she didn't need him. So what was the point of any of this? Have you ever worked so hard for something that you forgot why you wanted it in the first place? Have you ever been so focused on proving someone wrong that you lost sight of proving yourself right? Junior year hit Maya like a freight train carrying bricks made of exhaustion and despair. The easy classes were over. Now came advanced econometrics, upper-level theory courses, research methods that required more hours than existed in a day. Her scholarship covered tuition, but living expenses were another beast entirely. She'd added a fifth job tutoring high school kids in math for $20 an hour and still found herself rationing meals, choosing between buying the required textbook or making rent, calculating how many days she could stretch a tank of gas in the beat-up Honda Civic she'd bought third-hand. Her body started giving out in small ways. Migraines that made her vision blur, a persistent cough she couldn't shake, hands that trembled when she wrote, because she was running on caffeine and adrenaline and very little else. Her advisor, Professor Martinez, pulled her aside after class one afternoon. "Maya, you look terrible," she said, and it wasn't an insult, just a fact. "When's the last time you slept more than 4 hours?" Maya couldn't remember. "You're burning out," Martinez continued, her voice gentle but firm. "I've seen it before. Brilliant students who push too hard and crash. You need to slow down." But slowing down wasn't an option. Slowing down meant falling behind. Falling behind meant extra semesters. Extra semesters meant more debt. More debt meant her father was right. So Maya smiled, lied, and promised to take better care of herself, and then went straight to her shift at the coffee shop where she'd stand on her feet for 6 hours making lattes for students who didn't have to choose between sleep and survival. Then came the medical bill. $347 for an emergency room visit when the cough turned into bronchitis turned into pneumonia and she collapsed during her economics midterm. $347 she didn't have. The hospital offered a payment plan, $60 a month, which didn't sound like much until you factored in that her monthly budget was already stretched thinner than paper. Something had to give. Maya stared at her bank account, at the numbers that never seemed to grow no matter how hard she worked. And for the first time since that night in her father's kitchen, she let herself cry. Not pretty crying. Ugly, gasping sobs in the corner of the campus health center bathroom, where no one could hear her fall apart. Because this was the cost nobody talked about. Not just the money. The isolation. The exhaustion. The constant, grinding pressure of knowing that one mistake, one failed class, one missed shift, could start a domino effect that would topple everything she'd built. Was it supposed to be this hard, or had she made a terrible mistake? The envelope arrived in November of junior year, unmarked except for her name in handwriting she didn't recognize. Inside was a check for $500 and a note on scratch paper. "Your mother would want me to help. Don't tell your father. Uncle Marcus." Maya sat on her dorm room bed holding that check, and something inside her finally, completely broke. Not broke open. Just broke. Because the money helped. It paid the medical bill and bought groceries and gave her 1 month where she could breathe slightly easier. But it also confirmed what she'd been trying not to admit. She was failing. Not academically. Her GPA was still strong. But she was failing at the one thing she'd set out to prove, that she could do this completely on her own. She needed help. She'd always needed help. And the crushing weight of that realization made her wonder if her father had been right about everything. Winter of junior year bled into spring, and Maya moved through her days like a ghost. She went to class. She went to work. She studied. She slept when her body literally gave her no choice. But the fire that had burned in her chest, the defiant spark that said, "Watch me prove you wrong," had dimmed to barely glowing embers. Her friends noticed. Jordan, who she barely saw anymore but who still texted every few weeks, asked if she was okay. She lied. Mrs. Chen, her high school counselor who still checked in occasionally, called and asked how she was holding up. She lied. Professor Martinez recommended she see the campus counselor. She went once, lied about being fine, and never went back. Because admitting she was drowning felt like admitting defeat. And if she admitted defeat, what had the last 3 years of suffering been for? Then came the final semester of junior year. And with it, the assignment that would either save her or destroy her completely. Senior thesis proposal. Her economics professor, Dr. Kaplan, announced it with the enthusiasm of someone who genuinely loved academia. This is your chance to explore something meaningful, something that matters to you personally. Maya sat in the back row, exhausted, and thought, the only thing that matters to me personally is surviving. But she went back to her dorm that night and opened her laptop and started typing a proposal about something she knew intimately: the real cost of higher education for first-generation, self-funded students, the hidden expenses, the mental health crisis, the choice between eating and buying textbooks. She wrote until her eyes burned, and when she finally stopped, she had 15 pages of raw, unfiltered truth. She almost deleted it. It was too personal, too revealing, too much like admitting that this whole experience had nearly destroyed her. But something stopped her. Maybe exhaustion, maybe clarity, maybe the last dying ember of that original fire. She submitted it. Dr. Kaplan called her into his office 3 days later. Maya prepared for rejection, for judgment, for being told that personal sob stories weren't appropriate for academic research. Instead, he looked at her with something that might have been respect. "This is important work," he said quietly. "Hard work, painful work, but important. Are you sure you want to do this?" Maya thought about her father, about his certainty that college was a scam, about 3 years of trying to prove him wrong while slowly proving him right in ways he never anticipated, about the price she'd paid and was still paying. "Yes," she said, and her voice didn't shake. "I'm sure." Dr. Kaplan nodded. "Then let's make sure your story changes things for someone else." But here's what Maya didn't know yet. Couldn't know. That back home, her father was struggling too. That his construction business was bleeding money to younger competitors, with business degrees who knew things about marketing and efficiency that Robert had never learned. That he'd lost 3 major contracts in 2 months to companies whose owners had MBAs. That Uncle Marcus had confronted him over beers, saying, "You're losing your daughter because you're too proud to admit you might have been wrong." That Robert had driven to the university once, parked across from the campus library at midnight, and watched Maya through the window, studying alone at a table piled with books, her face drawn and exhausted, and he'd almost gone inside. Almost. But pride is a vicious thing. And fear is even worse. And Robert Rodriguez had built his entire life on the belief that he'd done everything right without formal education. Admitting he'd been wrong about college meant admitting he'd been wrong about everything. So he drove home. And the distance between father and daughter stretched wider, even as they both suffered alone, each too stubborn and scared and damaged to reach across the void and say the words that might save them both. So tell me, how do you forgive someone who can't admit they need forgiveness? How do you bridge a gap when both people are standing on opposite cliffs, too afraid to take the first step because falling means losing everything? And when does the cost of being right become greater than the cost of being wrong? Would Maya even invite him? That's the question that kept her awake the night she received her final grades, the night she officially became a college graduate, summa cum laude, top 3% of her class. She sat on her dorm room floor surrounded by cardboard boxes, her degree audit printed out like a battle map of conquered territory, and she held her phone in her hand, her father's contact photos staring back at her. 4 years. 48 months of silence punctuated by awkward holiday texts and conversations so surface level they barely qualified as communication. 4 years of proving him wrong while simultaneously destroying herself, trying to prove him right about the cost. And now, with graduation 3 weeks away, she had to decide. Did Robert Rodriguez deserve a seat at her triumph? Or had he forfeited that right the night he told her college would ruin her life? Mrs. Chen was the one who helped her see it clearly. Maya had driven home for spring break, the first time in 2 years, and she'd stopped by her old high school to visit the counselor who'd believed in her from the beginning. They sat in the same office where Maya had once cried about her father's refusal to help. And Mrs. Chen asked the question that cut through everything. "Who are you doing this for, Maya? If you don't invite him, is it because you don't want him there, or because you want him to feel what you felt?" Maya opened her mouth to answer and found she couldn't. Because the truth was complicated and ugly and human. She wanted him there. God. She wanted him there. But she also wanted him to hurt the way she'd hurt. Wanted him to feel excluded, dismissed, judged as harshly as he judged her dreams. And recognizing that desire for revenge in herself made Maya feel small and petty and not at all like the person she'd spent 4 years trying to become. "Here's what I know," Mrs. Chen said gently. "Forgiveness isn't about them. It's never about them. It's about you deciding you're done carrying the weight of their mistakes on your shoulders." She leaned forward, her eyes kind but unflinching. "Your father was wrong. Categorically, completely wrong. But holding on to that rightness, that's still letting him control your story. You survived college. You thrived. You did something extraordinary. Don't let his doubt be the thing that defines your graduation day. And in that moment, Maya understood. This wasn't about whether her father deserved forgiveness. It was about whether she deserved freedom. Freedom from resentment, from the constant need to prove herself, from the exhausting work of carrying a grudge that only made her tired. So she made a decision that felt both terrifying and necessary. She would invite him, but not the way he'd expect. Maya spent the next week designing something special. Not a typical graduation invitation with cheerful fonts and generic congratulations. Something else, something that would communicate everything she couldn't say in words. She bought heavy cardstock paper and printed formal tickets, the kind you'd see at a theater or a concert. Elegant, official. Each one had her name, the graduation details, and a seat assignment. Most of her tickets were straightforward. Reserved for Jordan Davies, or reserved for Professor Martinez, or reserved for Uncle Marcus. But her father's ticket was different. In bold, unmistakable letters, it read, "Reserved for those who doubted me." She held it in her hands for a long time, this small rectangle of paper that carried 4 years of pain and perseverance. It wasn't kind. It wasn't even particularly fair. But it was honest. And maybe that was enough. She mailed it with a handwritten note, her penmanship careful despite her shaking hands. "Dad, I did it. Not to prove you wrong, but to prove myself right. There's a seat reserved for you, if you want it. Either way, I'll be okay. I learned how to be okay without you, but I'd rather not have to be. Love, Maya." She dropped the envelope in the mailbox before she could second-guess herself, and then she waited. 1 day, 2 days, a week. No response, no phone call, no text, nothing. And slowly, Maya made peace with his silence. She'd extended the olive branch. Whether he took it or left it to wither wasn't her responsibility anymore. She started focusing on other things. Her job offer from a financial consulting firm that came with a salary that made her want to cry with relief. The apartment she'd rented, small but hers, paid for with money she'd earned. The student loans she'd start paying off but could actually afford now. The future that was finally starting to look less like survival and more like living. Graduation day arrived wearing perfect weather and Maya's hard-won confidence like accessories. She put on her cap and gown, looked at herself in the mirror, and saw someone she almost didn't recognize. Not the scared 18-year-old who'd chosen herself over her father's approval. Not the exhausted college student who'd counted ceiling tiles and rationed meals. Someone new, someone who'd walked through fire and come out tempered instead of burned. The ceremony was held in the university's outdoor stadium. Rows and rows of seats filled with families waving signs and taking photos. Maya sat with her fellow graduates, listening to speeches about futures bright with possibility. And she scanned the crowd looking for familiar faces. She found them, Jordan and his parents, beaming with pride. Professor Martinez, who'd driven 3 hours to be there. Uncle Marcus in the back row, wiping his eyes. But the seat with her father's ticket? Empty. Maya felt something twist in her chest. But it wasn't the devastating pain she'd expected. It was sadder than that. Quieter. The grief of accepting that some bridges burn completely, no matter how hard you try to rebuild them. They called names alphabetically. Maya waded through the A's and B's and C's, her heart beating steadily, her hands calm. When they reached the R's, she stood, smoothed her gown, walked toward the stage with her head high and her steps sure. Maya Isabella Rodriguez, Bachelor of Arts in Economics, summa cum laude. The applause washed over her like a wave, and she climbed those steps feeling every single person she'd had to become to get there. She shook hands with the dean, accepted her diploma, the physical proof that she'd done the impossible thing. And as she turned to face the crowd, to take in this moment she'd fought so hard for, she saw him, her father, standing in the very back of the stadium, tears streaming down his weathered face, one hand pressed to his chest like his heart was breaking, the other clutching that ticket, the one that said, "Reserved for those who doubted me." He hadn't sat in the seat, couldn't sit in it. The message was too painful, too accurate, too true. But he'd come. Despite his pride, despite his fear, despite 4 years of being wrong and knowing it, he'd come. Maya's eyes locked with his across the distance. And in that moment, something shifted. Not forgiveness. Exactly. Not yet. But the possibility of it, the beginning of understanding that people can be wrong and still love you. That fear can look like cruelty, that bridges burned can sometimes be rebuilt, one careful plank at a time. She didn't run to him, didn't wave, just nodded once, small and slight. An acknowledgement that said, "I see you. And maybe that's where we start." The ceremony continued. Maya walked off the stage and back to her seat, diploma in hand. And she felt lighter than she had in 4 years. Because she'd done it. She'd survived. She'd succeeded. And whether her father approved or didn't, whether he'd been right about the cost or wrong about the value, she'd proven the only thing that really mattered, that she could trust herself to make hard choices and live with the consequences. After the ceremony, they met in the parking lot. The conversation was halting, painful, real. Robert's voice broke when he said, "I was wrong. Not about everything. The debt is real. The struggle was real. But I was wrong about you. I was wrong to make my fear your prison." Maya's throat tightened. "I didn't do this to hurt you, Dad. I did it because you taught me to work for what I want. I just wanted something different than you imagined." He nodded, wiping his eyes. "Your mother would be so proud. I am proud. I just didn't know how to say it, without admitting, I was terrified of losing you." "You almost did," Maya said quietly. "I know," Robert whispered. "I know." He held out the ticket then, the one she'd sent him, now creased and worn like he'd carried it everywhere. "Can I keep this?" Maya smiled, sad and soft. "Keep it. But Dad, next time I achieve something, you don't get the seat for doubters, you get one for believers." "Next time," he agreed, and it sounded like a promise neither of them was sure they could keep but were willing to try. "So here's my question for you, and I really want you to think about this. Have you ever had to choose between someone you love and something you needed? Have you ever had to walk away from approval to chase purpose? Drop a comment below and tell me your story. Because Maya's journey is one story, but there are thousands of others just like it. People choosing themselves. People rebuilding burned bridges. People learning that sometimes love means letting someone be wrong about you until they're ready to see the truth. Hit that like button if this story moved you. Subscribe if you want more real stories about courage and consequence. And share this with someone who needs to hear that it's okay to choose yourself, even when it costs everything. Because sometimes the people who doubt you aren't villains. They're just scared. And sometimes proving them wrong is less important than proving yourself right. What would you have done in Maya's position? I'm reading every single comment.